Hi everyone, my name is Yvonne Chilimanzi. I'm a counseling psychologist,
My name is Brainy. I am a counseling psychologist as well.
and welcome to our brand new podcast, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
me and
You look
Brainy have kind of
nervous.
thought about this for a while. In fact, we actually made a go at it at the beginning of the year and
Definitely.
ran out of steam. I think is the words that we'll go with.
Yeah, yeah,
But we're here taking another stab
yeah.
at it.
And this time around, elevating it a little bit, challenging ourselves. Because when we started audio wise. So we are figuring this out. And I was just saying to Yvonne now that we are building this plane while we are flying it. So you kind of also want to bear with us. We are learning. But yeah, it's exciting to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think just to start off with, we wanted to have a little conversation just around mental health and mental illness. And maybe just as a way of starting us off, Brainy, I was wondering if you can tell us what your introduction to mental health has been.
Yeah, great question. I think mostly like many of us, and when I say many of us, I mean people from a black background like myself, although I have observed it with other races as well. I think we get to that introduction by what we observe as we grow up, which was the case for me as well. A lot was going on in my upbringing where I think the very first event where I had an idea of what mental health was through observing mental illness instead. Particularly in my immediate family, there would be repetition of psychosis.
Okay.
Yeah, and the other day I was actually just thinking about it and thinking about how it was happening. It was happening in such an interesting way as well, Yvonne. It was almost happening with every firstborn, in my mother's side of the family, firstborn in the places of my cousins, right? Almost every firstborn would have an experience of psychosis, and how the family would respond to that. It would be more of a spiritual way of looking at
Yeah.
it. It's demonic. Not that I don't believe that it isn't, but that was my first introduction to mental health, by observing mental illness. Yeah, yeah.
That's quite interesting. I didn't know that about you. Yeah.
Really?
So the psychologist brain in me is actually very interested to know what symptoms were they
Yeah.
presenting with.
Your typical psychosis,
Okay.
definitely out of touch. Aggressiveness was most prominent in all of them. I would say when I was coming of age, the first person I observed it with, or where I observed it, would be one of my big sisters. The other ones, I was too young to kind of see what exactly was happening. It happened with my uncle as well. One of the sisters I could actually see when she was in psychosis. You can tell that the person is not here. The things they are saying, they're not making sense. They're very aggressive. And when they do come out of that state, they look confused. And it would happen through triggers. There would be certain things that would trigger that in the person, and we would see
Course.
it. So the family would always be in guard, and then later on, after a couple of years, also it happened with one of my big brothers as well, another firstborn as well in the family. With him, I feel like it was handled much better, because he did get to go for psychiatric intervention. Although in the beginning they also went the route of pastors, churches, and all of that. And again, I am a staunch believer in Christ. I am not ignorant that there is a demonic opportunity, that could happen with mental illness, but but we also have to find a way of looking at it holistically. So I'm really glad that when it came to him, the family kind of approached it differently. So he was taken to a psychiatric facility and he was put on medication. He is functioning quite well to this day. I believe he's still on his medication. Yeah, but for me, that was, oh, this is what mental health is, or mental illness is, and my very first understanding of it kind of stemmed from there. Yeah.
Sure. So that kind of touches on that aspect of mental illness being a bit hereditary, but I think that's something that we'll get to a little
Yes.
bit later.
Yeah.
Part of what incited us to kind of have this conversation
Yeah.
is the idea that there isn't a clear understanding of what mental health or mental illness
Yeah.
is. I was
Yeah.
wondering, can you give us a definition
Yeah.
of it?
Yeah. Why don't you tell the people what your introduction to mental health was? I will come to that. Yeah.
That's a interesting question, because I think my introduction to mental health was probably just me. I remember I was probably about 16
Yeah.
when something, I don't know if it wasn't traumatic, because you know how I feel about the word.
Yeah.
But it was something that dramatic, rather,
Okay.
that kind of happened
Okay.
in the family, and I was somehow directly impacted by it. And I remember just not being able to wake up the next morning and being able to get to school. Like, I
Sure.
literally could not get out of
Sure.
bed. I couldn't bring myself to go and shower. I
Sure.
just could not do anything at the time. And I was in high school, so I was living with my aunt at the time, and I had to I had to kind of go tell her that I can't make it to school
Yeah.
today. So nothing had happened. So it
Yeah.
wasn't like I was
Yeah.
sick. It wasn't like I was hit. It wasn't
Yeah.
nothing
Yeah.
physical, but just
Yeah.
my body would not cooperate. My mind was
Sure.
in a daze, like it was just going round and
Right.
round and round.
Yeah.
And I remember after, I think it kind of took me 2 days to get out of that.
Yeah.
And I remember my
Sure.
uncle then said to me once, "You're the type of person who will suffer from," this first time I'm hearing these words, "clinical depression." And I was
Oh.
like, what in the world is that? But he
Sure.
was kind of just talking about, my uncle was a pastor and was talking
I
about
see.
just that inability to get out of bed,
Right.
and inability, like I was almost comatose, like I could not speak. You could come and talk to
Sure.
me and I would know what I want to say, but my mouth would just not, like that's how badly affected I was by whatever had
Sure.
happened on that day. And that was kind of my introduction to things can affect you in a really
Yeah.
negative
Yeah.
kind of way.
Makes
Here
sense.
today, so I made it out. So
I'm so glad.
yeah, that
Yeah.
that was a interesting introduction to it for
Yeah.
me. Yeah.
Ah, cool. I also didn't know that.
I don't
Also
tell
didn't
that
know
story
that.
very often. I don't think I'm very proud of that
Okay.
that story, but
Okay.
yeah.
Here
it's
we
part of
are.
me.
Yeah.
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 Oh.
You asked me if there was a difference
Between mental health and mental illness.
health. Definitely, absolutely. It's quite unfortunate that almost every day when you and I engage with our clients, there is that confusion that we get to see. Although I think now we are able to understand, that a lot goes on in informing that knowledge of mental health in us, like you and I just shared right now. So, like many of the clients that we encounter on a daily basis define mental health by mental illness.
Yeah.
Yes, and so it's important that we are able to distinguish. And if I could bring in a more clear or maybe even simple definition to what mental health really is, it is basically the way one think, the way one feels, and the way one act. It is the way you feel, think, and act. Your sense of being, your entire well-being, which encompasses those three factors: your thinking, your feeling, and your acting. And it's observable in how you will cope with stress and stressful factors in your life. We will observe your mental health through that. And also, we kind of will observe it in how you are able to respond to circumstances. What I mean by that is, are you the type of person who can learn? Are you able to learn, right? So we'll observe your mental health from that perspective as well. Are you able to function? By functioning, I mean, can you show up? Are you able to show up and work and do your everyday duties? You know, can you function in society, in community? Can you contribute? All of these things kind of reflect your mental health. But just at the basics of what it is our thinking, our feeling, and our acting. And health is health, Yvonne. Illness is illness. You know, when I explain it in simple terms to even someone little, I kind of say these two things are not the same, because health is health, illness is illness. Similarly, as if we were to observe physical health, right? If you are physically healthy, you are without conditions of illness. You are without, so if you are physically healthy, also with physical health, there is a continuum, right? You might look like you're healthy, but there would be certain things that we would have to look for. And similarly, mental health is the same as well. You can be mentally healthy or mentally unhealthy. However, if we are going to speak about illness, when it comes to mental health, is a specific condition that would disrupt your functioning. So illness will encompass a condition. Health is health, as you would observe it even with your physical health, if I'm making sense. Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think the thing that stands up to me about mental health is the ability to cope. I think it always comes with what is your capability, what is your ability to function, to be healthy, essentially. Whereas with the illness, that capability is kind of taken away. Is the way I've come to understand it.
Yes.
Does that sound like
Definitely. So the more we are able to observe, even with ourselves, that whatever it is we are facing at that time, if we do find the capability within ourselves, if we do have the ability to can cope, we may be more closer in terms of how far we are with the reflection of our mental health. And what I mean by that is, if you can cope, then it might not be a reflection of mental illness. And obviously, we'll debunk that a little bit later, you know. But if we are to distinguish the two, I know a lot of the time when we hear mental health, we hear mental illness. Yes, but if we can just conceptualize them as health is health, illness is illness, I think that in a way, that's something our brain can kind of make sense of. If you are physically healthy, like I said, you do not have a condition. For example, if you have cancer or if you have diabetes, right, you have that condition, right, which will then obviously be the illness, right? Similarly with mental health, there is a condition which kind of speaks to the illness, right? But when we speak about mental health, everybody has mental health. You can be mentally healthy or you can be mentally unhealthy, yes. But not everyone has mental illness, but everyone has mental health.
So I'm kind of reminded about something that I've said before, where I've said, I'm in pain, but I'm not sick. You know, and that sounds like mental health. So you can be healthy and be in pain. So you can have a sore, you can have a wound, whatever the case may be. But you're not sick. And when you're sick, then you've got maybe cancer, you've got flu, you've got something that is within you that is inherently wrong. Correct. I can put it in those words.
Correct.
How common do you think mental illness is?
Ooh, I think it is more common than we would like to admit. Yes, I think it is, especially in our times. One time you and I were actually talking about this, that how come it looks more like we are a generation that is struggling more mentally, you know, than the previous generations, which I would think is true. And I think you and I were having this conversation I don't know. I don't remember what we were. We have a lot of conversations, so. But I think when it came out, it was in one of the conversations where you said to me that, but Brainy, if you look at the times that we exist in today, they're very different to times before.
Yeah.
And of course, mental health is such a universal thing, Yvonne, and I am pretty sure, I am confident that it has been there since the beginning of the beginnings, right? I just think that with time, kind of there's a difference, there's an evolution. And I think you were alluding to the idea that perhaps because of how we lived.
Yeah,
yes, how we
'Cause I
lived.
think what I was saying to you about
Yeah.
that on that day was just the sense of there were always communities
There you go.
about people, right?
Yeah.
So there were always communities for young mothers, communities for newly married people, communities for kids, communities for the youth, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So if you did have something that was, I don't want to say bothering you, but if you did have something that was wrong, there were people that were there to catch it.
There you go.
There were people that were there to guide you
Yes,
through it. And,
yeah.
and nowadays we're kind of like live so far away.
So individualized, kind of egocentric society that we exist
Exactly.
in. And I think we were even just highlighting how it would be so easy back then when you are suffering to not internalize your suffering and kind of want to share it with everyone around you. Today we exist in a world where we kind of shy away from showing our weaknesses, our sufferings, our challenges. And I think it's just how our societies are today. There's a very egocentric, approach that we hold. And I think it affects quite a lot in terms of when we get to face mental illness. And so because of that, it kind of aggravates our experiences. And I think that's probably why mental health is at the state that it is. And of course, we're not ignorant of also some of the changes that are existing around us in the current society that we live in. I think that's a conversation for another day, but I do think that it is more prominent than we would like to admit. And if you check in research, there's a lot of people who go undiagnosed. I think there is a podcast that has enlightened quite a lot of people. I don't know if you've seen it. And I think Trevor Noah was sharing his experience with his ADHD going undiagnosed, and how his experience of depression was related to that. And I think there are many people like him out there who are going through quite a lot in terms of their mental health, but undiagnosed. And of course, there are factors that also kind of play into how come we go undiagnosed. There's a lot of stigma. So to kind of even put yourself in a place where you can find a formal diagnosis is kind of far-fetched for some people, But I do believe, to easily answer you, that mental health is quite common than we would like to admit. I think in almost every, even closer to ourselves, the very person next to you, if we really observe, even ourselves, if we really observe quite closely in the times that we are existing in, there is quite a lot going on with our mental health. Yeah.
Just kind of talking about the commonality of it, there was something I was listening to the other day, and this guy, I never remember people's names.
Yeah.
It was kind of talking about if we look at ourselves as people who evolve, evolution is kind of based on survival, right? So it's kind of what survival of the fittest, who survives best. And a lot of people suffer from anxiety today. And that's because we are descendants of anxiety. So the people who were anxious and constantly kind of trying to make life work for themselves are the ones that survived and then produced the rest of us who are suffering from anxiety at the moment. So so I think it's a pretty common thing that people really suffer from.
Yeah.
What do you think, Brittany, causes mental illness?
I like that question. It takes me back to psychology training and psychology 101. There are quite a number of factors that causes mental health, Yvonne. You just mentioned one right now that sometimes it is genetically passed on. It's one of those that we would look at as a predisposing, kind of a factor. Genes being that you would observe in the lineage of your family, like you said, certain symptoms, certain temperaments, and so in that way there are certain factors that are quite genetic that we can look at, or biological. And when I say biological, sometimes what causes mental health is what we call chemical imbalance in the brain, and of course that can also be linked genetically, Sometimes our brains do not respond as they should, and there tends to be a chemical imbalance. I mean, at a biological level, from that experience alone, you can have some challenges with your mental health, and then if we are looking at maybe factors that are kind of outside of ourselves, that can be more precipitating type of factors. We can look at the experiences that we encounter, like childhood trauma, it's a
Environmental
big one.
factors.
Yes, it's a big one. Abuse, neglect, child neglect. And some of the factors also, they may occur a bit later in our lives, which is what I would like to call more of risk factors, right? Yes, there would be those type of factors that kind of happen or occur at our earliest of developments. Like I said, the genetic predisposing factors, as well as your upbringing, the type of environment that you're brought up in. But even as you grow and you further develop, there are certain factors that kind of just may come along in your development. I would like to call those risk factors, right? Looking at things like substance abuse is one of them. One of the common one, I think, in our times would be divorce.
Yeah.
I do think divorce is playing such a huge impact on mental health of the first people experiencing it, but also the people impacted by it, the children. I think it's one of those. I do think poverty is a risk factor.
Absolutely.
I despise poverty. I really do. I do think when it comes to our mental health, poverty does play a major role, and to look at it as just a normal experience of a human being, it will be an illusion. Poverty does have a huge impact on one's mental health. Relationships, definitely, yes, is one of them. I think grief, grief can be such a huge impact to our mental health. And I'm specifically mentioning it, away from it being a diagnosis, because I think when it comes to grief, sometimes we kind of have a difficulty of kind of just looking at it as an experience of loss, yes. So loss of a loved one can really impact our mental health, loss of a job, loss of a relationship, like you just said, Jolo can really bring, yes, it can be quite a triggering experience in terms of our mental health. So yeah, there's quite a lot that we look at when when we ask the question of what causes mental health, we and that's why when you kind of also have to take that journey with yourself, you almost need to look at most of your life. You have to look at a lot of things and not just look at where you are, but look at all of these things, if there's a relatedness to them. Yeah.
So I think just looking at the broad spectrum of things that you've just mentioned also kind of alludes to why mental illness is so rampant. Sounds like such a big word, but I think basically in the era that we live in, it really is quite rampant, and it's because of all of these different factors that we kind of have to deal with, or you have to
Yes.
kind of figure out how to cope with
Exactly.
as a person. And I think
Exactly.
just as we were talking about the lack of support that we sometimes feel now,
Yeah.
that leads to that sense of mental illness, literally just being on your doorstep every single,
Yeah.
every now and again. Let me not say
Exactly.
every day,
Yeah.
every now and again.
I mean, look at the current state of the country we live in, every single day, and someone encounters something traumatic, mugging, robbery, and I think we take lightly, because I think when we tend to experience something in a more common manner and kind of it's everyone's everyday experience, we tend to normalize
Yeah.
those experiences. And when we do that, it can be quite problematic, Yvonne, because then we do not take time in really checking in with ourselves in matters of how affected am I by this experience. I think we can find ourselves in a situation where this experience is normalized, is happening, yes, to a lot of us, but we might not respond to the same way. We might not cope the same way, So I think also it's quite unfortunate, like you are saying, sometimes all of those things are happening every day around us.
Yeah.
So you can imagine, what does that have to say about our state of mental well-being? Yeah.
No, Brittany, our time is running out.
Really? I'm having
you and
fun.
I know you and I talk a lot.
Yeah.
But before we quickly have to kind of wrap this up, what are some common misconceptions that you have come across about mental health, or rather mental illness, actually?
Yeah. Okay, the first one, I'm going to run through them as fast as I can. The first one is the idea that mental health is just something that is not real. It's in your head. I think, especially my black folks, coming from a black background, I get to hear this quite a lot. That when someone kind of comes forward and explains that I'm feeling this way, I am, experiencing this, the response they tend to have, is quite discouraging. It becomes, no, it's not. It's just in your head. It's not a real thing. You're making up these things.
Think yourself out of it.
Think yourself out of it. Pray about it. Yeah. So that's the first misconception about mental health, is it's thinking that it's just an unreal thing. Mental health is very real. The second one that I can talk about is the idea that mental health is weakness. It's very common to many people. It has stigmatized people. I've seen how it makes it very difficult for many people, even in the space of therapy, to kind of access themselves, and be vulnerable. There's just a wall, that we have built around ourselves with the fear of being weak. So there's that misconception about our mental health, that it's weakness, It isn't, of course, And another misconception around mental health, I think, is the idea that it happens to a specific race for some reason. I know some people tend to kind of distance themselves when it comes to mental health. I know we have a long history, there's a long history of where that kind of response is coming from, but all kinds of races, all kinds of genders, all kinds of ages.
Mental illness doesn't
Mental
discriminate.
health does not discriminate, ma'am. It happens to all of us. So it's not about it being of a specific race. And to be specific, where I have heard this misconception, it would be it's a white man with a white man's disorder. It isn't. It's also not a shameful thing. There's also that. There's a lot of shame around mental health, tying into that idea of it being a weakness. So there's a lot of shame around mental health. It's a shameful thing. How dare you have mental health? Mental health issues rather. So that's also one of those that I've kind of observed. I think I've covered, yes, this is another one. Another misconception is around mental health kind of being the same as our emotional well-being. What I mean by that is we kind of see a difficulty is in distinguishing, where if you are feeling sad for a day, all of a sudden you'll hear someone saying, I'm depressed.
I woke up feeling
I
depressed.
woke up feeling depressed. No, you're not depressed, ma'am.
just sad.
You're just sad. You have emotions, and on that particular day, your emotions are of that nature. You are feeling sad. You're not depressed. There's a lot to look out for, and of course, we'll get into that conversation in kind of distinguishing what depression is from sadness. It is okay. It is normal to be sad for a day. But being sad is not being depressed. So I always see that misconception, or rather that twist, where people just throw in the terms. I'm traumatized. I'm depressed out of just having quite a saddening experience, I guess. Yeah.
I think it takes away from the sense that you're allowed to have a bad day, right? You can wake up and be in a bad mood. You can be sad about something that's happened to you. It doesn't necessarily mean you suffer from depression. You can be worried, doesn't mean you have anxiety as well. And I think that was actually something I was going to ask you, like, what is the distinction between mental illness and just the everyday emotional highs and lows? But I think that's actually a really big conversation to have, and we can have that conversation on a different day.
Okay.
Just to kind of close up for us today, what are some telltale signs of that someone has a looming mental illness?
Okay. I just spoke now about that distinction, with feelings, emotions, and an illness or a disorder, right? So when it comes to our ability to kind of see, whether there is a mental health challenge looming or a mental illness kind of coming forward, what we will look out for is how long, if you are feeling sad, how long have you been feeling sad? You can, like you said, it's okay to be sad today, but to be sad today, tomorrow, next week, the whole month being sad, that is not normal, right? So it's a question of how long. We will look for that. We will look also for the severity, right? The severity, there's a continuum. So there's sadness and then there's depression, right? Yes. So how severe, is your sadness? We will also kind of look at that. If it's low mood, we kind of also kind of go into it. There's ways of interrogating those parts of ourselves. How severe is this feeling? One of the best things about kind of checking for our mental health, Yvonne, is that we need a level of attention to ourselves. So yourself, what your normal self feels like. So as soon as you start kind of feeling outside of that, it's also one of the ways to kind of check, the sadness I'm feeling today, is it different? Like I said, how severe is it? How long has it been there? Are there other symptoms that are kind of accompanying the sadness, right? Because when it comes to mental illness is not a feeling, right? We don't just look at one thing. There is no one single mental illness that we diagnose based on one symptom. So there will be other things that will tell you accompanying that sadness or that deep sadness. Are you struggling to get out of bed? Are you struggling to eat? Are you really finding it hard to kind of function? So there will be other signs that you kind of also have to check out for, so there will be the severity, the longevity. Are there other symptoms? The first one you mentioned earlier, are you able to cope? Is there difficulty in functioning? Is there difficulty in coping? Yeah.
I think, when we look at this DSM ICD-10 code, or even just in diagnosing in general, the thing we always look for is impairment in functioning, right? So that could be a functioning with regards to work, school, home, relationships, whatever. If anything is negatively impacted, then we kind of then start looking at that as a mental illness.
Definitely. Yeah.
Sure, this conversation could go on, I think, for a while.
I think so.
Because we're both very passionate about mental health and mental illness.
I hope you are as well. You should be. I think we are in a time that is quite exciting. I get excited when I speak about mental health. I think also because the conversation is broader in our times. So I hope you are excited as well. You should be excited about your mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we are gonna stop it there
Okay.
for now. And I think
Okay.
we actually have a part 2 coming up on looking at what is therapy, just to kind of what's the next step now that you have a
Yes.
mental illness. Kind of look at that. But
Yeah.
thanks for being a sport and indulging me in the questions that I had
You're
for you.
welcome, Yvonne. You're
Okay.
welcome.
See you guys next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.